There's a kind of meeting that doesn't happen by searching. Two people, whole on their own, not looking, find themselves in the same place. And something shifts, not because one of them was broken and the other arrived to fix it. Not because of timing or luck or the right app. Something deeper than that. Something that doesn't announce itself. It just registers. Quietly, like a sound you feel before you hear it. I keep coming back to this. Pause. The people I'm thinking about, the ones this is really for, have been through a particular kind of refinement. Long, quiet, often invisible. And when two of them meet, what happens isn't addition. It's something harder to name. The signal they carry together is larger than either carried alone, not because they completed each other. Because neither of them needed completing. But they were held apart for a long time before that. And I think there's a reason for that. Premature contact, before the inner architecture is solid, would have dissipated something essential, what felt like isolation, like being passed over, like waiting for something that might never come. That wasn't punishment. It was more like careful preservation. The kind you don't understand until much later. The integrity had to be built first. The capacity to be close to someone equal without losing yourself in the process, without shrinking, without leaking. The waiting felt like punishment because there was no frame for what was being protected. Pause. Think of two tuning forks separated by a wall, neither striking anything, neither silent. Just holding their pitch. The moment that wall comes down, they don't need to touch. Proximity alone is enough. What was always encoded in them begins to sound. That's closest I can get to describing what this kind of convergence actually is, and I'll come back to it. What blocks most people from recognizing it when it arrives isn't distance. It's the wrong template. Three of them, usually. The first is rescue. The quiet, unexamined belief that someone will come and lift you out of the loneliness, the half-finished healing, the life that doesn't quite fit. That template collapses the moment any real pressure arrives. The second is completion, the feeling of being a half, waiting for the other half. That template reliably draws in someone equally incomplete, and what gets built drains faster than it grows. The third is what culture taught us to call romance, chemistry mistaken for coherence, attachment mistaken for alignment, intensity mistaken for truth. All three kept certain people cycling through connections that were never meant to last. They were calibrations, necessary ones, but they left something behind. A residue, a gap, not a crisis. Nothing you could point to and say, there, that's where it changed. Something quieter than that. A life that looks right from the outside, that functions, that earns the right kind of responses from the right kind of people, and yet, from the inside, feels like watching yourself from about 6 inches behind your own body. Slightly behind, slightly off. Not broken, just not quite landed. Pause. I spent 2 decades inside lecture halls, the University of Edinburgh. Seminar rooms. 23 students at a time. And there was a particular moment midway through a session on Indigenous knowledge systems when something crystallized for me. I'd spent 12 years watching institutions train people to dismiss any way of knowing that couldn't fit inside an instrument. And there I was, inside a legitimate room, using legitimate language, making a legitimate case for ways of navigating human experience that Western frameworks simply weren't fine enough to measure. The gap between what I knew and what I was permitted to name in that room became something I carried with me when I left. It's not the gap between ignorance and knowledge. It's the gap between a signal you've received your whole life and the language available to transmit it. And something in that signal, for as long as I can remember, pointed toward a particular kind of union. Not chosen by preference, not built by effort. Arrived at through a mechanism most people were never told exists, A recognition that comes before personality, before compatibility, before any of the things we've been taught to look for. The gap between what you know and what you're permitted to say becomes unbearable. Not all at once. In increments, in the small moments when you look out at a room full of faces registering only confusion, as though the words you're speaking are arriving in a language they were trained not to hear. You leave. You cross a courtyard. Something hollow opens behind your ribs, and you understand, quietly, that the life you've been living has become a translation of a translation. Legible to everyone around you, increasingly illegible to yourself. That's what it feels like to operate on someone else's frequency while carrying a signal that belongs to no external system. You wake up. You do the work. You function at a level that earns respect from people whose respect stopped mattering years ago. And still, the interior and the exterior don't match. There's a lag, a quieter synchrony between who you're becoming inside and the container the world built to hold you. Most people don't name it, because naming it means admitting it's not the details that are wrong. Not the job, not the relationship, not the resume, the structure itself. From the outside, you look fine. Better than fine, steady, capable. No one sees the internal clock that's been marking time towards something you couldn't articulate, but somehow always knew was coming. I resigned from the University of Edinburgh. 2 weeks later, I was standing at the back of my own lecture theatre, watching a junior colleague teach my course. I still had the same knowledge. I was the same person, but the container had been withdrawn, and with it, the name the container had given me. Pause. This is what people on this particular path do with unbearable moments. They leave. They walk out of the architecture that no longer fits, even when there's nothing visible waiting on the other side. Even when walking out means standing in a courtyard with everything you are and no structure to reflect it back to you. You've done this. Maybe not with a career. Maybe with a relationship. A friendship. A version of yourself you quietly outgrew before anyone noticed you'd already left. You felt the gap become unbearable, and you chose the gap over the counterfeit. That's not failure. That's calibration, and the cost compounds. Quietly. Each structure you leave behind doesn't just remove a container, it removes a witness. The world that once reflected something back to you goes silent. What remains is a rich, full interior life with no mirror, no audience. That's not a side effect of this path. That is the path. You've done this. Maybe not with a career. Maybe with a relationship, a friendship group, a version of yourself you quietly outgrew, so quietly that no one noticed until the absence was already complete. You felt the gap become unbearable, and you chose the gap anyway. Over the counterfeit. That's not failure. That's calibration, and the cost of that calibration compounds in ways you don't always see. Each structure you leave behind doesn't just remove a container, it removes a witness. The world that once reflected something back to you goes quiet. And what remains is this deep interior life with no mirror and no audience. That's not a side effect of the path. That's the path itself. Whether what comes next arrives as a single moment of recognition or as another person whose frequency matches yours from across a distance neither of you understood you were crossing, that question lives in the space between what you've already surrendered and what's been slowly forming in the silence. And inside that silence, something was being built, something with a secret folded into its architecture. A secret the isolation itself was holding long before you had words for it. Some protections don't feel like protection while they're happening. They feel like exile, like the invitation got lost. Like everyone else was handed a map and you were told to walk blind. But sometimes the deepest shielding isn't a wall. It's an invisibility, a frequency that only becomes visible once the person carrying the matching signal stops broadcasting the old need. What was being built in that silence wasn't just a reunion between two people who recognize each other across a crowded room. It was a calibration. A slow, precise tuning, one nervous system gradually learning to stop scanning for what it never needed and start resonating with what it was always moving toward. And that kind of tuning happens in the dark. In the years of not being seen. In the hollow ache of watching your own life from one step behind, knowing that the person the world kept reflecting back wasn't the person you were becoming. The question that hangs in that space, whether the isolation served something beyond endurance, is still worth sitting with. Whether what felt like abandonment was actually a forge. Whether the absence of early recognition wasn't a withdrawal of love, but a withholding of premature visibility. Because some lights seen too soon attract the wrong eyes, and the person whose field is calibrated to meet yours, that person would have been invisible to the version of you that still needed to be seen. So something waited, not passively. Actively. The way a composer waits for the right instrument before introducing the melody that changes the whole piece. Pause. This sensitivity you carry, it operates like a second nervous system layered just beneath the skin. Walking into a room, the emotional weather arrives before any face registers, not through body language, not through micro-expressions. Those are the rational containers people reach for after the fact. What actually happens is immediate and atmospheric. The grief someone has curated behind a practiced smile, the tension in an alliance thick with unspoken history, the residue of an argument that ended 30 seconds before you opened the door. It arrives as pressure, as temperature, as a frequency with no off switch, and the exhaustion from this isn't the kind sleep can reach, because the room keeps broadcasting and you don't get to close the receiver. This same attunement pulls you out of sleep at hours the ordinary world calls strange. 3, maybe 4 in the morning, when the collective mind goes quiet and something else opens up. Not a disruption, a clearing. You stopped fighting it a long time ago, because pushing back only traded clarity for grogginess. So you rise. Breathe, write or don't write. You simply occupy that threshold hour the way a sailor learns to read a tide no one else notices, knowing the stillness before dawn carries information the daylight drowns out. And underneath all of it runs a different relationship to time, not the calendar's version, appointments, deadlines, countdowns. Something older. Geologic, almost. A convergence felt not as an event with a date, but as a pressure slowly increasing, a turning sensed in the bones, the way animals feel the barometric drop before a storm arrives. You've tried to explain this once or twice. What you got back were polite faces with nothing behind them. The language for this doesn't exist in ordinary rooms. So it hums. Underneath grocery lists and traffic lights and ordinary Tuesday afternoons, it hums. And the need for someone else to confirm what your interior compass already reads, that need quietly dissolved somewhere along the way. There's also the structural incompatibility. The deep refusal to fit inside systems that require you to make yourself smaller. No salary compensates for it. No title. No sunk cost of years already given. At some point, something essential simply walks. Not out of rebellion, not ego, not restlessness, just a simple structural truth. What you carry exceeds the container's capacity, and staying would produce distortion, not devotion. You've been blamed for this. Called flaky, called arrogant, called someone who can't commit. But the pattern says something different. The pattern suggests a frequency that cannot be housed in architecture built for a smaller bandwidth. And then there's this quieter thing, the people who settle in your presence without knowing why. Who tell you, sometimes years later, that something in them came back online when you were nearby. That a panic they'd carried for decades loosened. No technique, no protocol, just proximity. It costs something each time it happens. It doesn't wait for permission or check your energy reserves. It draws from somewhere beneath the personality, beneath the biography, and it has emptied you as often as it has humbled you. Pause. Each of these things points toward the same reorientation, not arrival. A perceptual shift so complete that thinking becomes almost beside the point, and just beyond that is a further quieting, the place where even the need to name any of this falls away, and what remains is simply the frequency itself, moving through a life that has finally stopped asking why. That is one of the marks. Do animals and children respond to you in ways that bypass explanation? The dog that crosses a park to press its head against your knee, the infant in a grocery store line who locks eyes and goes completely still, holding a recognition that adults have long since trained themselves to dismiss. You've noticed this pattern repeating across years, across contexts, and you've filed it away under asterisk strange thing that keeps happening asterisk, not quite knowing what else to call it. And just beyond that lies something harder to name, not a destination, but a further quieting, the place where even the need to name these gifts falls away. What remains is simply the current itself, moving through a life that has finally stopped asking why. That is one of the marks. Do you find that animals and children respond to you in ways you can't quite account for? The dog that crosses a park just to press its head against your knee, the infant in a grocery store line who locks eyes with you and goes completely still, holding something in its gaze that adults have long since learned to look away from. You've noticed this pattern. It keeps repeating across years, across contexts. And you've filed it somewhere under asterisk strange thing that keeps happening asterisk because you didn't know what else to call it. Pause. Pause here before the seventh question. A version of this exercise exists, and it's probably reached some of you, where the speaker simply lists things you already know about yourself. And for a moment, it feels like being seen. Then the video ends. The feeling fades. The weight returns unchanged. Nothing shifts. That's not what this is for. These questions aren't here to mirror what you already sense. They're here to place you on a map that most people never discover exists. And that map isn't about giftedness. It's about assignment. Two very different things. One is about capacity, what moves through you without effort. The other is about responsibility, what is being asked of that capacity in silence, without witness, without applause. The confusion between them, the quiet assumption that being chosen means being recognized, is one of the most effective silences a chosen one will ever encounter. Do you know the weight of being given something, again and again, that arrives without validation? Does it settle in your chest some nights? That dual knowledge that what you carry matters, and that almost no one around you can confirm it. Another signature surfaces here. Do you notice that your nervous system was trained to read safety as threat? That the moment something becomes stable, calm, available, your body doesn't relax. It braces. It scans. It waits. Not because something is broken in you. Because your earliest environment taught you that peace was a prelude to ambush. You learned to survive inside chaos. You learned to suspect stillness, and you've been unwinding that wiring for years. The unwinding continues. Just beyond that lies a deeper recognition, the place where the body stops bracing not because the world proved itself safe, but because something inside finally understood that the danger belonged to a timeline that already ended. That quiet arrival, felt in the bones rather than the mind, marks a crossing few speak of and fewer still can describe for others. Those dream arrivals, the face, the phrase, the scene that comes in sleep and then shows up again in waking life. You hold them lightly, because the alternative is too heavy. And yet you trust them, quietly, without making a thing of it. That is one of the marks. And finally, the 10th, a love for something the world keeps breaking, not abstract, not performed. a specific, unshakable tenderness for something real, something human, something you can't explain without risking being misunderstood. That thing has been broken, cheapened, dismissed by people who couldn't see what you see. And none of that has stopped the loving of it. That is one of the marks. The reason the answer stays the same, every question, the same short sentence, is that these aren't separate symptoms. They're one thing seen from different angles. Here's what hasn't been said yet. It's what this entire list has been pointing toward. The chosen one is not chosen for recognition. The chosen one is chosen for infrastructure, not singled out for elevation, singled out for load bearing. And the question that matters most once these marks are fully received isn't asterisk do I qualify asterisk, it's asterisk what am I being asked to hold asterisk. Pause. How long did those hours stretch at that kitchen table? The mini disc recorder was already running, weeks of preparation, not notes, not an outline, but the kind of preparation that belongs to someone who knows a threshold is approaching and is quietly searching for reasons not to cross it. The opening words were spoken. 90 seconds. Then the recording stopped, the disc ejected, and it went into the same drawer as the father's letters. Spring of 2004, Portobello, Edinburgh. The disc stayed there for over a year. It was called Prudence. A responsible hesitation. The work, 12 structured sessions, an entire methodology built across 7 years of research and practice between 1997 and 2003, needed peer review. It needed credentialing. It needed the blessing of a recognized therapeutic modality before it could go anywhere. Because what if it hurt someone? What if the transmission was incomplete, the container insufficient, the methodology untested by anyone except the one who built it? That was the excuse. And it was a reasonable one, defensible. The kind of excuse that sounds indistinguishable from wisdom when you say it out loud. But the reason that disc went into the drawer wasn't prudence. It was terror. Not terror of failure. Terror of permission. Recording those sessions would have meant admitting something a lifetime of professional training had refused to say out loud, that the frameworks trusted for decades weren't enough, that the ancestral healing methodology assembled across 7 years, the lineage work, the generational pattern interruption protocols, the reframing of inherited trauma, didn't fit inside any institution that existed. There was no department for this. No journal, no credentialing body, no one who could stamp it approved, and releasing it without approval meant standing alone. It meant saying, asterisk, this transmission carries its own authorization, and that authorization doesn't come from a structure you recognize. Asterisk, that was the threshold. The one that couldn't be crossed. Not yet. The chosen one faces this moment. Maybe you're facing it now. The thing built to carry, the book, the business, the methodology, the transmission, it's sitting in a drawer somewhere, not from laziness, not from lack of clarity, because no one has given permission, and the waiting has been for permission from a system that was never designed to authorize what you carry. What was learned when that drawer finally opened is this. The permission doesn't arrive from outside. It arrives from inside, but not the inside of ego, not the inside of ambition, not the inside of needing to be seen as legitimate. It arrives from inside the assignment itself. The work carries its own authorization, and the only person who can withhold that authorization is the one who was given the work. Here is the first permission released today. What was learned when that drawer finally opened is this. The permission doesn't come from outside. It comes from inside, but not from ego, not from ambition, not from some desperate need to be seen as legitimate. It comes from inside the work itself. The work carries its own authorization. And the only one who can withhold that authorization is the one who was given the work. So here is the first permission. Speaking what you know, that's allowed, without waiting for a credential that doesn't exist yet. The insight, the methodology, the transmission you carry, it came from years of lived experience, from failures that taught what no classroom ever could, from the specific alchemy of a lineage being broken open and remade. That is the credential. There isn't a higher one, and this is worth being clear about. This isn't a dismissal of institutions. 20 years were spent inside them. The rigor matters, but the work you carry wasn't born in an institution. It was born in the crucible, and the crucible issues its own kind of authorization. Pretending otherwise, that ends now. Here is the second permission. Release the work before it's finished. The manuscript, the practice, whatever is still sitting in that drawer, it won't emerge complete. It will become complete through being released. The people it's meant to reach will finish it alongside you. That was the mistake in 2004, the belief that the container had to be flawless before it could hold anyone, but the container becomes whole by holding people. Not before. Through. The methodology is allowed to evolve. The transmission is allowed to deepen. What's required isn't something finished. It's something true. Truth and completion were never the same thing. Here is the third permission. Permission to be misunderstood by people whose framework simply can't accommodate what you carry. This one cost the most to learn, and it's the one most necessary to actually receive. Not everyone will understand what you're doing. Not everyone should. The work was calibrated for a specific frequency. It won't register for people tuned to something else entirely, and their inability to receive it isn't evidence of a weak signal. It's evidence of precise calibration. So much effort has gone into making yourself legible to people who were never meant to read you. That effort ends now. The transmission isn't for everyone. It's for the ones who have been waiting for exactly what you carry, and they'll recognize it the moment the translation stops, the moment you stop shaping the language to please people it was never intended for. The drawer was opened. 12 sessions were recorded, and the people who needed them found them, not through marketing, not through a platform, not through any institutional stamp of approval. They found them because the frequency was clean, the transmission was honest, and the permission to speak it, once it was finally granted, became permission for others to receive it. That's the mechanism, the merger approaching, the dual sovereign convergence, the decadal level partnership. It locks into place on the same principle. Two fields synchronize not when one authorizes the other, but when both have given themselves full permission to be what they already are. The permission has to be internal before the merger can be external, and there's something not yet named, an image that will clarify when the calibration sequence arrives. Fire burning without a source, in a clearing where no one has been for days. The architecture has been received. And just beyond that clearing, where the fire burns unattended, something else is waiting. The decadal influence engine. The dual sovereign multiplier dynamic, the high security isolation that was never punishment, it was preparation, the zero compromise alignment that operates without codependence, without fusion, without the old romantic mythologies that trained you to hand your sovereignty to someone who couldn't hold it. You know what this merger is. You know what it isn't. You know the false templates. You know the real one, and you know, maybe for the first time, why the gap between your exterior life and your interior knowing had to widen before it could close. There's nothing left to chase. The convergence isn't hiding. It isn't waiting for you to earn it or hunt it down. It's waiting for one thing only, that you maintain your sovereign baseline, your posture on the throne you already occupy. Pause. That is the standing command. Not frantic action. There's nothing left to chase. The convergence isn't hiding. It isn't waiting for you to earn it or hunt it down. It's waiting for one thing only, that you maintain your sovereign baseline. your posture on the throne you already occupy. Pause. That is the standing command, not frantic action.